Watercolor Abstract Art Designs Using Adobe Photoshop Podcast Series 1 Introduction. Welcome to Series 1 of my Watercolor Abstract Art Designs Using Adobe Photoshop. My name is Philip. I am a freelance watercolor abstract art designer using Adobe Photoshop, combining traditional watercolor techniques with digital editing in Photoshop to create unique, abstract artwork. I create artwork from scratch digitally, or digitize hand-painted watercolor pieces and then use Photoshop to refine, manipulate, and enhance them. In this introduction, I will talk about how I started my art journey and why I love what I do. Let's go. My artistic style started to develop through admiration of the work of others. I started out about 20 years ago with the Adobe community, watching and creating my own drawing techniques and ability to convey emotions using Photoshop and Lightroom. Soon I started designing my own characters and my passion increased from there. I started to display my work on Adobe stock. Then I went to a graphic art school to study design and started doing small abstract designs for independent art publishers. These early abstracts are an expression of my devotion to art that I saw when I was young. I believe that every art is a form of communication and that requires reaching out to others and seeking common understanding, so I always keep others in mind when I create. I build relationships in the artistic community by supporting my fellow artists, attending exhibitions and gallery parties, and hosting workshops to share ideas. My shop is a creative fulfillment. Having my own art shop allows me to express my creativity freely and share my unique vision with the world. My artistic journey began with an appreciation for the work of others. About 2 decades ago, I engaged with the Adobe community, honing my drawing skills and emotional expression through Photoshop and Lightroom. This led to the creation of my own characters, fueling my growing passion. I showcased my art on Adobe stock and later pursued formal education at a graphic art school. There, I began crafting small abstract designs for indie art publishers, reflecting the deep-seated love for art I've held since youth. Philip J. Gordon. www.philip.jordanart.com. What to expect in the upcoming series. There will be in total around 10 series in total, starting with an introduction about navigating around Adobe Photoshop and being familiar with the workspace, creating a document and saving your files. In-depth tutorials on how I create Photoshop brushes, patterns and styles. The preparation of combining filters, brushes, layers and paper texture blending. Creating watercolor abstract art in Adobe Photoshop is like orchestrating a symphony of texture, colors, and spontaneity, where digital tools mimic the fluid unpredictability of pigment and paper. Watercolor abstract art in Photoshop is less about precision and more about emotion, each brushstroke a whisper, each texture a memory. In Photoshop, you aren't just replicating watercolors, you're conjuring the soul of it, layer by layer. Whether you're building blooms that drift like breath on glass, or masking textures that feel like forgotten dreams pressed between journal pages, the process becomes meditative. It's a kind of painting where edges are less boundaries and more thresholds, and by using Photoshop not as a tool, but as a brush dipped in imagination, you're pushing abstract watercolors into a realm where emotion are transformed. Advanced techniques for watercolor effects. There are around 6 different techniques that I use for watercolor effects, including layered texture blending, liquefy and smudging with brushstroke deformation, and atmospheric grain and texture interference. These techniques let you move beyond imitation into interpretation, where Photoshop becomes not just a tool, but a brush dipped in memory and mood. If you're working on a specific piece, each technique is more than a trick, it's a dialogue with your canvas. The goal isn't to simulate water and pigment, but to let those forces speak through your textures and transitions. These techniques aren't just tools, they are invitations to dialogue with your canvas. Core techniques for watercolor abstracts. To achieve a watercolor abstract art effect in Adobe Photoshop, you can combine various techniques including applying artistic filters, using layer blending modes, and incorporating textures. Convert your image to a smart object for non-destructive editing. Use the Filter Gallery's dry brush and cut out filters, and then add effects like smart blur and find edges. Experiment with blending modes like screen and multiply and layer in a paper texture to simulate the look of real watercolor paper. These subtleties turn Photoshop into a vessel not just for replication, but for storytelling. If you're crafting a piece around a particular mood or motif, every effect is a choice. Every texture a sentence in the story your canvas wants to tell. These core techniques will all be covered in my future series. Creating watercolor abstract brushes. To create watercolor abstract art brushes in Adobe Photoshop, you'll need to prepare textures, define brush tips, adjust brush settings, and save your custom presets. You can achieve a realistic watercolor effect by experimenting with various settings like brush tip shape, shape dynamics, scattering, texture, and transfer. Consider using a Wacom tablet for more control over brush strokes with pressure sensitivity. Creating abstract art brushes in Adobe Photoshop is like crafting your own visual language, each brush a signature, each stroke a mood. You will learn how to prepare brush stains and texture, defining brush presets and patterns, adjusting brush settings for realism, saving and customizing your brush, creating multiple variations for dry and wet edge effects. These brushes become more than tools, they are emotional extensions of your hand. Creating custom watercolor abstract art brushes in Adobe Photoshop allows for unique, personalized digital painting experiences. By crafting your own brushes, you can achieve specific effects, textures, and styles that resonate with your artistic vision, pushing beyond the limitations of pre-made brushes. Where and how to find inspiration. Finding inspiration for watercolor abstract art in Adobe Photoshop is like tuning into the rhythm of pigment and possibility. To find inspiration for watercolor abstract art in Photoshop, explore various sources like nature, photography, and even fabric patterns, and then experiment with different Photoshop techniques like filters, brushes, and blending modes to achieve a watercolor effect. Where to look for inspiration. 1. Nature's palette. Observe the fluidity of clouds, the layering of leaves, or the bloom of coral reefs. Sample colors and textures using Photoshop's eyedropper tool to build organic palettes. 2. Photography and portraits. Use blurred or high-contrast photos as emotional foundations. Abstract them with watercolor brushes and masks to evoke memory or mood. 3. Fabric and textile patterns. Scan or photograph woven textures, tie-dye, or embroidery. These can be transformed into brush tips or displacement maps for layered abstraction. 4. Poetry and music. Let rhythm guide your brush dynamics. Paint the sound of a cello or the feeling of a whispered stanza using scatter, flow, and opacity. How to translate inspiration into Photoshop. 1. Use artistic filters. Combine dry brush, cutout, and smart blur with blend modes like multiply and screen to simulate pigment layering. 2. Apply paper textures. Overlay scanned watercolor paper and set to overlay or linear burn to add tactile realism. 3. Experiment with custom brushes. Create your own from scanned stains or download expressive packs. Adjust shape dynamics, scattering, and transfer for organic behavior. 4. Distort with liquefy and warp. Push pixels like pigment, stretch, swirl, and soften to mimic water's unpredictable flow. Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for spending part of your day with me. Your support means the world. I see you out there, tuning in week after week. You're not just a listener, you're part of the story. Thanks for exploring this topic with me today. I hope it sparked something meaningful for you. I'll be back next week with more stories and insights. Until then, thank you for being here. Today we explored how pigment and pressure shape emotion in digital brushwork. We also explored how custom watercolor brushes can transform your digital canvas into a mood-driven masterpiece. So, if you came here wondering how to create expressive watercolor effects in Photoshop, you now have the tools and the mindset to begin. If today's episode sparked something in you, share it with a friend or leave a review. It helps more than you know. Join my newsletter for behind-the-scenes stories and early access to new episodes. Thanks for joining me today. If you felt inspired by this episode, you'll love exploring my visual world. Head over to Philip J. Gordon Abstract Art Designs on Etsy, Behance, or Instagram. I create expressive watercolor abstracts and digital brushwork that speak in color and emotion. You can find links in the show notes. Until next time, keep painting with feeling and keep listening with heart. Philip J. Gordon.